Antifa is going to be designated a domestic terrorist organization. The president intends to sign that executive order very soon as it's drafted, as soon as today, later this afternoon. And this is something the president campaigned on because we have seen a rise in violence perpetuated by Antifa radical people across this country who subscribe to this group. And unfortunately, it's gone widely uncovered by many in the legacy media. It also went completely ignored by the previous administration. Not anymore. Not only, as you mentioned, were the bullet casings subscribed with Antifa mottos, if you will, in the heinous assassination of Charlie, but there have also been more examples than I could read off for you here in this briefing room today of violence from Antifa. I will just read a few. In July 2025, several members of an Antifa cell ambushed and opened fire on officers at an ICE facility in Alvarado, Texas, shooting one officer in the neck. Also in July 2025, 3 Antifa members were charged with assaulting a police officer during a violent riot outside an ICE facility in Portland, which for weeks prior had been under siege from the local Antifa terror cell. In February 2024, a transgender Antifa terrorist detonated an explosive device outside of the office of the Republican Attorney General of Alabama. In July 2023, Antifa members linked to abortionist group Jane's Revenge firebombed pro-life facilities and vandalized churches.
As you probably know, Donald Trump is saying that he's going to declare Antifa as a terror organization. The problem, he can't actually do that according to U.S. law, as that only applies to foreign organizations. Antifa isn't even an organization in America. Antifa stands for anti-fascist, and I am anti-fascist, as should all of you be. If you aren't Antifa, you are pro-fascist. And fascist governments, what they do is they try and go after people who are anti-fascist. Antifa is not a single structured group, it's a loose domestic movement. This is Trump's attempts to basically go after anybody who calls him a fascist. Just like he declared that immigrants who had tattoos were gang members and sent them to a prison in Sikot, let's hope that he doesn't start declaring Americans who think fascism is bad and then start going after them. Raise your hand if you consider yourself Antifa.
All right, guys, so we got to talk about some great news from the Trump administration in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's assassination at the hands of a left-wing radical terrorist, okay, because that's what it was. It was a act of domestic terrorism. Now, what inspired this act of domestic terrorism? Well, we have a hint that this individual may have been influenced by Antifa. In fact, again, if I was a betting man, I would say that this person was heavily influenced by Antifa. And the reason why we know this is because on the bullet encasings, you have Antifa symbols and the Antifa theme song, right? Which would indicate that this person was radicalized with Antifa ideology. And Antifa ideology has led to acts of domestic terrorism in this country, okay? It led to violence and chaos during the BLM riots, during the Roe v. Wade riots, during the pro-Palestine riots, doing any of these far left riots. You're going to see Antifa. You're going to see their signs, their symbols, the terminology, all of these things, okay? And again, you know, this is something that should have been done a long time ago, and I'm very happy that the administration has finally decided to crack down on these radical left lunatics.
We are gratified that justice was done in this case and that this heinous, evil, terrorist monster was convicted for his attempt to not only murder the now 47th President of the United States, but to wage in so doing a campaign of terrorism against all Americans. But as you mentioned, this country is dealing with a rising threat of radical left-wing terrorism. There were 2 very nearly successful attempts on President Trump's life. A bullet hit President Trump in the head. It was only centimeters away from taking his life. This second attack that we're talking about today, the president was moments away from walking directly into that line of fire. Of course, the healthcare CEO was brutally gunned down by another self-described so-called anti-fascist that was then celebrated by other self-described anti-fascists, who of course are really communist revolutionaries. And the heartbreaking assassination of our dear friend Charlie Kirk while speaking at a college campus, billions of dollars in property damage by Antifa and other far-left rioters, organized criminal campaigns of doxing and violent intimidation, 1,000% increase in violent attacks on law enforcement. These are not isolated incidents, Will. It is part of an organized campaign of domestic terrorism. It's sophisticated, it is well funded, it is carefully orchestrated, and it's designed to prevent the lawful democratic process from occurring in this country through violent political means. And so President Trump took decisive action yesterday by formally declaring Antifa to be a domestic terror organization. And then as we speak, under President Trump's leadership and direction, we are working on a broader counterterrorism strategy to fight domestic terror in this country, to uproot, dismantle, defund, and destroy these terrorist networks inside the United States.
Yeah, see, they heard that. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I think that Stephen Miller might be one of my favorite members of the Trump administration, okay? I think that he tells it like it is. He's raw and uncut every single time, okay? And I love it. I absolutely love it. And it's about time that we address the issue of Antifa because they've caused way too much damage, destruction, violence, chaos in this country, okay? But for whatever reason, I think what really, really, really is fascinating to me is the fact that the mainstream liberal media is complicit in covering up for Antifa, pretending as if Antifa is not a real thing, while also at the same time panicking over the Trump administration, going after a group that, again, they claim doesn't really exist.
One is the president directly ordering the Justice Department to bring criminal charges against people he perceives to be his political enemies, including firing prosecutors who told the administration there was not an evidentiary predicate to bring those charges. We've also now, in an executive order today, we've got the president describing Antifa, the anti-fascist, it's not even really a movement, the anti-fascist tactics of a portion of the protest movement as a domestic terrorist organization. What is your reaction to those things? What do you think the appropriate response is to things like that?
Well, in normal times, we should and could expect that our courts would step in when asked to declare the legality or illegality of what the president is doing. Because, Civics 101, we all know, we designed our democracy through three co-equal branches of government, the executive, the legislative, and the courts, the judicial. And I would like to believe that that is still something that is standing. Certainly at the local level, you can see where the various courts have actually provided the guardrails against his abuse of power, against President Trump's abuse of power. The lower courts have been more inclined to step up. But my fear is that as some of those cases reach the United States Supreme Court, that we can't necessarily count on precedent to dictate how they will rule on the president's power.
It's going to be this executive order where they're going to try to create a new classification for anybody on the left who opposes Trump as somehow a member of Antifa and a terrorist.
Yes.
Like, this is coming. And I don't think we are fully... Now, I don't think there's any... The problem, like, I don't even know what Antifa is. I know what the definition of Antifa is. And
I know what the word means, but it's not a group.
There is no group.
No.
And so, but what's dangerous is that by designating it, who's going to define who the group is? And if the Trump administration decides to say, you, George Soros, are a part of this group that I designated, and you're like, no, I'm not, and it doesn't matter. Like, they're going to then use that as some sort of potential opening. And I think that's what's so extraordinarily dangerous about these designations. Like what he did with, look, he's sort of testing the theory of this case with what he's doing with Venezuela and sort of designating this sort of, well, they're narco-terrorists.
Narco-terrorist
and somehow it allows, by the way, he's using the AUMF
of course,
as their legal cover on this, which of course is just
20-odd years old.
So far removed from what the AMUF was meant to be.
Yeah, so again, what I find to be fascinating about Chuck Todd in particular, right, who is having a full-blown meltdown, right? I don't know what Antifa is, right? Antifa's not a group, right, according to these people. Except Chuck Todd in particular interviewed Antifa experts, right? A guy that actually wrote the Antifa handbook, right? The anti-fascist handbook, right? Antifa. Chuck Todd interviewed this dude back in 2017 when he was working for Meet the Press, but yet he claims in 2025 he doesn't know what Antifa is. Really?
They're going to try to create a new classification for anybody on the left who opposes Trump as somehow a member of Antifa and a terrorist.
Yes.
Like, this is coming. And I don't think we are fully... Now, I don't think there's any... The problem, like, I don't even know what Antifa is. I know what the definition of Antifa is. And
I know what the word means, but it's not a group.
There is no group.
No.
Mark Bray, you are writing this book, Antifa, the anti-fascist handbook. Explain this movement and its roots. Mark Bray is a Dartmouth professor who has studied the Antifa anti-fascist movement. Antifa is a far-left political movement that argues it's necessary to confront hate groups, sometimes with force. Professor Bray is author of the new book, Antifa, the Anti-Fascist Handbook.
Now, you've been very critical of NBC's Chuck Todd for an interview he had with Antifa sympathizer Mark Bray. Spell it out for us, please. You think he's soft on leftist terror?
Oh, so he has Mark Bray, who's a supporter of Antifa, on Friday to do a debate. He brings to debate him the head of the Southern Poverty Law Center. The question is violence permissible? And they have a nice chit-chat debate about whether there should be violence. And then he repeats it on Sunday. So what do you have here? You've got a militant left-wing organization debating a radical left-wing organization on the proposition, is violence okay? Just try for a second to imagine, for a minute, the same reporter, Chuck Todd, on MSNBC, moderating a debate with, say, the Ku Klux Klan on one side and the John Birch Society on the other, with the question, is violence okay? This is a leftist organization, and Chuck Todd simply does not understand that when you do something like that, you are raising the credibility of the notion of violence against their political enemies.
You know, I don't
that to me, I hate to say it, but this is aiding and abetting in a very dangerous conversation.
Yeah. So that clip was like prophecy, okay, looking back at it. And again, what I find to be so fascinating about this topic, this subject, is not only Chuck Todd playing dumb, right, about Antifa, knowing what Antifa is, but the conversation that he had about Antifa was specifically about, is violence ethical? Because Antifa, right, their handbook specifically calls for violence, right? They call for violence against what, again, they describe as fascism. Now, also what I find to be interesting is how this interview, which took place on NBC, all of a sudden, this video has expired, right? I would have played more clips from this interview, right? But again, all of the interview clips have expired, okay? But as you can see here, the topic is violence ever acceptable in the face of hate groups, right? So they're having an actual conversation about, is violence acceptable? Now, why are they having this conversation? Well, because Antifa is in fact a militant, radical leftist group that explicitly believes in political violence. That is what they believe in. They believe that they have to engage in violence, okay, in order to achieve their political goals. That is what they explicitly believe. For example, in his interview, the question was asked, you write that violence represents a small, though vital slither of anti-fascist activity, and you mentioned that it's not the only thing they're up to, but what makes it so vital? The answer to this question was, even if a group does not intend for that to be the way to go about it, if you're organizing against violent fascists. Now, keep in mind what these people define as violence. Words, right? They think words are violent, okay? That's why I want you guys to understand. They believe that words are violent. So they say, well, the fascists are violent. No. What they define as violence are words, right? So again, I just want people to understand. Being able to defend yourself can unfortunately come in handy. The other part of it is looking at the broader historical trajectory of the rise of fascism and Nazism in Europe. The liberal playbook for stopping the advance of fascism failed, aka nonviolence, free speech, open debate, right? Like actual liberalism, right? The actual definition of liberalism, yeah, that failed, right? And they specifically reject that, okay? This is why they're far left. And they say, no, they got to use violence to get what they want. This is what they believe in. This is what they believe in, okay? They explicitly believe in violence. So again, what really blows my mind about these people is that, again, they pretend as if, well, it's not a real group. It's not a real organization. It doesn't exist, right? It doesn't exist, okay? You're just making it up when it's everywhere. Hassan Piker, anti-fascist, paraphernalia. He has the Antifa book in the background, right? So clearly this guy is at the very least sympathetic to Antifa, if not outright a part of the organization. You got symbolism. For example, these arrows were the same arrows that were allegedly on the bullet encasings of the Charlie Kirk assassin. You have the Antifa flag here, right? So their logo, they got all types of symbols. They have meetings. They have actual chapters. So I'm trying to figure out how in the world is this not a group? How is it not an organization, right? If you got a logo, you got a song, you got chapters, you have meetings, you have an ideology, that's a group, right? That's a group. Okay, like these people claiming that, well, I don't know what Antifa is. It just means anti-fascist. That's the only thing that Antifa means, right? If you're anti-fascist, then you're Antifa. That's all it means, right? Again, these are the same people that'll gaslight you into believing that North Korea is actually democratic, right? Because the official title of the country, right, is the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea, right? So, again, they say, well, North Korea can't be communist, right? Because they say that they're democratic in the title. Again, this is the same thing with Antifa. Well, we're anti-fascists, except these people actually are the fascists because they use fascist tactics to fight fascism, right? Again, it's just very, very, very fascinating to watch these people do mental gymnastics and to pretend as if they don't know what Antifa is, right? And to me, the reason why they're doing this is the same reason why they wanted to cover up the motivations of the Charlie Kirk assassin, right? The reason why they lied about it, okay, and this is the honest to God truth, is because all of these people, at the very least, are sympathetic towards Antifa or they're outright a part of Antifa, right? All of them. Okay, I'm talking about even people in the mainstream liberal media. Even these mainstream liberal media folks are probably, again, at the very least, sympathetic towards Antifa or they're outright a part of the Antifa organization. This is why they're jumping through hoops to pretend as if they don't know what it is. They don't know what it's about, right? It's not a real group. It's not a real organization. It's just an idea, right? It's because they're complicit, and because they're complicit, it creates deniability when Antifa clearly is responsible for something, like, for example, the assassination of Charlie Kirk. They can say, well, Antifa's not a real group. It's not a real thing, right? And again, it basically makes it so it's hard to pinpoint exactly who is responsible, right? Or what ideology or what group is responsible. That's what it does, right? And again, I personally believe that even these liberal media news anchors, members of the Democrat Party, they are a part of Antifa, or at the very least, they are sympathetic towards Antifa. And this is why they go out of their way to try to pretend like it doesn't exist. That's why they do it. Because again, it allows people who they are sympathetic towards to commit acts of domestic terrorism without pinpointing exactly why it's happening or who is behind it or the cause behind it or the organization behind it. And it provides cover for things that these people agree with, right? That's what's happening. 100%. I'm convinced, right? There's no doubt in my mind. There's no doubt in my mind, okay? Because otherwise there would be no reason to gaslight like this, right? There'd be no reason to gaslight. But they're gaslighting because they support it, right? They support Antifa and their quote-unquote anti-fascist tactics, right? And labeling their political opponents as fascists is basically a green light for these far-left lunatics, a lot of whom agree with political violence. Well, again, why is that? It's because left-wing ideology, Antifa ideology, explicitly endorses violence. Again, so again, this is not a coincidence that liberals, leftists, believe that violence is necessary to achieve their political goals. They believe this. Again, Antifa teaches this, okay? And again, when they label people as anti-fascists, the radicals in their party who also self-reportedly have higher rates of mental health problems, right? So you have these people with mental health problems that believe in violence as the answer, being radicalized by Antifa ideology, and then they're acting on it. They're going after the people that they call fascist, okay? Because in their mind, anti-fascism, the tactics of anti-fascism call for political violence in order to achieve their goals, right? That's how they fight the fascist, okay? And this is the difference between the right labeling leftists as communists versus the left labeling the right as fascists. You know the difference? The difference is that the right does not explicitly endorse political violence. Also, the right does not self-reportedly claim to have mental health problems the same rate that the left does, right? That's the difference. That's the difference. So, again, they can deny all they want, but Antifa has rightfully been declared a domestic terrorist organization because they are an organization. They are a movement. They have a symbol. They have an ideology. They have meetings. They are organized, and they should be dismantled. They need to be dismantled. And if you're not a part of Antifa, if you don't agree with it, then you shouldn't have anything to worry about. But because they do, at the very least, sympathize with Antifa, if not outright agree with Antifa and their tactics, or they're part of the organization and or part of the organization, yeah, this is why they're freaking out. This is why they're freaking out. Because they're complicit. They're complicit. So let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.